Yeah, have a seat. It's a great crowd. Thanks for coming out on a cold night. As is our tradition, we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, so I'll ask you to all stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Have a seat. Okay. One brief announcement about next month's program. We're going to have, and I've forgotten his last name already, but who spoke in here before on the Erie Canal. He was very popular, and he only got halfway through his presentation, so he's going to complete that next. Dan Cody, thank you very much. No, he's a local, I think. Is he from Webster? I'm not sure, but I think he's from Webster. Dan Cody, that's his name. Okay, but tonight we've got the great pleasure to have our town village historian, and man knowledgeable about all things having to do with the area, local history, and that's David Crumb, who's going to speak to us about the days when Hilton had a department store, and it has a family connection as well. So, Dave, tell us about it.
Nice to be here tonight, and nice to see all you folks that came out on a cold night. Thank you. Hilton had a department store back in the 1800s to about 1940. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the two fellows that got it started. And so we're going to go over to Canada for a minute, because that's where they came from. Their names were Alan and Evan Fraser. They were children number 8 and 9 of a family of 12. They were born in the mid-1800s. I think Evan was about 1845 and Alan was about 1848. And back in those days, you were lucky if you got through 8th grade, and they did. And but then their folks said, "No, boys, it's time for you to go out and make your own way." And so they had to make some decisions. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but I have a feeling that they probably went to work with their father, who was a lumber agent on the St. Lawrence River. He used to ship lumber up to Montreal and various places, so they could get jobs there and earn some money to pay their way at home. They had to buy their own clothes, that sort of thing. They could still live at home, but they had to contribute to the family larder. As they got older, they began to think of bigger things, and there were 3 choices up there. You could continue on being a lumber agent, or you could head up into the Yukon with their cousin Caribou Cameron, and he's another whole story, but I won't get into that tonight. They opted out of either of those, or you could go over to the States, just cross over the St. Lawrence, and you could be in New York State. And there wasn't much going on up in the St. Lawrence County area, but there was a lot going on down in Rome, New York, because they're putting railroads through. So as I understand it, Evan went first, and I think he had a stint in the oil business down in Pennsylvania. You know, the Standard Oil had been discovered down there, and so there was a lot of labor heading that way. But later he came back to Rome and got a job on the Lake Ontario Shore Railroad. The Lake Ontario Shore Railroad started about 1871, but it collapsed in 1873 because there was the Panic of 1873, and there were plans to run it through Parma, but unfortunately everything fell apart. There was a man named Charles Effner here in Hilton, and they call him the father of the Hojack, because Charles Effner got some of the farmers to put big bonds up to get the railroad back on its feet, and then that all worked out, and even went further, and by some hocus pocus, he swung it from Parma Center, where it was originally scheduled to go, down through Unionville, was the name of Hilton at the time. And so that was a kind of a biggie because Parma Center withered on the vine, and Hilton or Unionville picked up and went places. And so that kind of sets the stage for all of this. So Evan and Alan are both in Rome. Evan gets the contract to lay the tracks from Charlotte to Kendall Corners, to do the grading and supervise the crew and so forth. It's about all I know. And so I'm going to swing the pictures here, or start the pictures. This is going to be kind of a lot of pictures, some stories, some good luck, some bad luck, and finally go out of business. But that's the story of the times. We've seen that happen everywhere.
Dave?
Yes?
Could you speak up a little, this music next door?
Oh yeah, that line dancing, I know, that's always bad. I'll raise the volume as much as I can. And continue to yell if you can't get my words back there.
Here we go.
Oh, and the first computer issue here. Okay, well, this picture here shows you the front of their home on the St. Lawrence, Alan and Evan's home. Their grandfather had bought 750 acres of land from the Sir John Johnson estate back around 1815. And it wasn't the greatest farmland. There was lumber, there was marshes, but that was the front lawn sloping down to the St. Lawrence, and it's on the bulge of the St. Lawrence called Lake St. Francis. It's about 10 miles north of Cornwall and probably 40 miles south of Montreal. And today it's called Charlottenburg Park. It's a town park that's very well occupied with people with motorhomes and that sort of thing. But that's the only picture I happen to have of it. It's not a great one, but it sets the stage. So they're heading across the St. Lawrence over to New York State. And there's your typical railroad gang. People ask me, is this picture people in Hilton? And if they are, who are they? I don't know who they are. But it's a great picture, and it kind of shows you what those people look like. They weren't badly dressed. None of them were overweight. And there's some young ones and some old ones, and they're working along, having a lot of labor. Okay, this I've already talked about a little bit. The two brothers came from Canada. I think this is repetitive. And Alan's job, Evan was supervising the crew. Alan's job was to go to the farmers from Charlotte all the way to Kendall and sit down with them and tell them, you know, Mr. Palmer, the railroad's going to cut through your 200 acres. I hope you don't mind having the Maine. After the shock of that, he said, you're really going to love it because you're going to be able to get your crops to market. And they thought about it, and they thought, yeah, that's going to be good because we were in a very limited market, and we were very productive here. Our good fertile soil with apples, wheat, peaches, etc. Sometimes that was difficult to get the product to where it belonged. This railroad made a big difference, and that's where the prosperity came in. It was the farmers that ended up doing well, and then, of course, that got passed along to the villagers because people in the village needed to do things to keep that economy going. So that told you what they're doing, and there's a picture of them. Alan's on the left, and there's Evan, both young men, dark hair, and fairly well dressed at the time. Though nobody really went to the photographer in their old clothes because it was expensive, and nobody smiled either. Strange. So they looked very sober, and I guess that's a good thing. The railroad was completed in August of 1876. A big celebration was held in North Parma as the first train passed through town. Cora Stoddard Butcher was the first person to ride on the new railroad. She happened to be a niece of the engineer, Mr. Wheeler, and he made it possible for her to get her, and she waved all her friends and said, eat your heart out. And so she got to ride. And then the next person was, well, let's see, I'm trying to think of her first name, Carrie Curtis Smith. And she was Doug Hurlbut's great-grandmother, if you relate to Doug Hurlbut, who was mayor of Hilton at one time and had a milk business here in town. And Carrie, she was the first paying customer. She paid 26 cents for a ride on the passenger train to take her into Rochester to buy her wedding trousseau. And she was married a couple months later to James K. Smith, and they were both married by Reverend Charles Hilton, for whom the town was named. So that's kind of a nice little start. When the railroad job was done, then decisions had to be made. Evan was kind of a soldier of fortune, and he took off for the oil fields of Pennsylvania. Alan, however, had fallen in love with a North Parma girl named Ella Wayne, and he didn't have a source of income. She didn't want to leave town, and so he had to figure out something to do. So he and a friend, Elam Cross, Elam was the grandson of the Lumen Cross, the first settler down at Bartlett's Corners, 1811, and he was a man about town. He knew how everything worked, and so he and Alan got together and they started a small general store on the corner of South Avenue and Main Street. And pretty soon a picture will come up of that. That was about 1875, I think, just a little before the railroad took off. So, there's Ella Wayne, by the way. She was the daughter of Rob and Betsy Easton Wayne. They were early settlers from Hamlin, eventually moved to Hilton. And they used to talk about the fact that they were kinfolk of General Mad Anthony Wayne. I've looked into it and I can't find anything much about it, but it's the same last name. Okay, here's the picture of the first store. This is kind of a rare old aluminum photo taken probably about 1875. It was for many years in Bill Newcomb's collection, and Bill was the grandfather of Pete McCann. And Bill, I think, or perhaps one of his children, brought it to the historian's office. And Frank Hubble has worked on it and made it very clear and nice. So that is the corner of Main Street and South Avenue about 1875, looking a whole lot different than today. That was called the Tennyson Block, after John Tennyson, who built it and owned it. John Tennyson's farm was over on the Wilder Road, and you'll know it as Kelly's. It's the old farmhouse there, and so that's where he was. And he was a wealthy farmer, and I think he was entrepreneurial and did a lot of progressive things.
Which corner is that?
This is the South Avenue going that way, and then where you don't see too much is Main Street. The picture's kind of cut off, so you're on the going southwest corner. It's where the brick buildings are today.
Wow.
Yep.
Looking west.
Looking west, yes, looking west, thank you. So who are these people? Well, Alan is in the very center there, and his partner Elam Cross is to his right. Those two we know. And Evan, who liked horses, and he traded in horses and raced horses and did all that sort of thing, he's sitting in the carriage in the front. And I think that's John Tennyson in the carriage in the back. He owned the building. And so everybody in town got together and, looked intelligent and stood on the porch there and had their picture taken. And I'd like to know who the dog is and who owned it. That's kind of neat to have a dog there. There's a lady there in a shawl. I think it's Z.W. Newcomb, Z.W.J. Newcomb has got his arms folded. He rented the south side of the store for a hardware business from Cross and Fraser. And that helped, of course, pay the rent and so forth. And he often had his hardware store next door to the Frasers. So that picture there is a really prize for our village to have something that early. Photography only got started in 1839, and so this is 1875. They progressed very fast, just like cell phones have in this country, but people didn't do a lot of outdoor photographing and so forth, so that's kind of special. Cross and Fraser were in business for 1 year, and the partnership was dissolved. I don't know the reason. I think perhaps there wasn't enough money for both. Cross and Fraser were lifelong friends, always congenial, so there was nothing acrimonious as far as I know. Evan had been in Titusville and Oil City as paymaster for one of the oil companies. Unfortunately, he developed a severe case of typhoid fever, and he had later returned to North Parma. He raised horses and worked with horses, and later he joined his brother, and they formed the partnership Fraser Brothers, and that's where things began. So this is a little bit complicated going through here, so I'll take it kind of slow. In 1883, the partnership buys 2/3 of the frontage on North Main Street from the Free Will Baptist Church. They remodeled the church into a store, and the next year added a modern connecting store building. Well, there'll be a picture of this coming up in a minute, but I'd rather paint the picture in words first. Now, to tell you what was going on with the churches in Hilton, the First Baptist Church, there were two Baptist churches in town, the First Baptist and the Free Will Baptist. The First Baptist came first, obviously, and it was built on the top of South Hill in 1830. It was a 60 by 40 oak timbered Greek Revival style building. The congregation had been meeting since 1809 in people's log cabins, barns, wherever they could find a place. They finally in 1830 got this church together up on top of South Hill. And they thought that the village was going to develop up on top of South Hill. But things didn't work out that way. The village developed down on Main Street near the water, near Salmon Creek. So what to do? So the congregation thought, and they had a meeting, and they said, let's move the church down to the village. So how they did this, I don't know, but if you in your mind can picture South Hill, no houses there, except maybe one on the top of the hill with Gideon Archer's home. They moved that church down the hill about this time of year when the ground is hard. And Salmon Creek, they changed the course of Salmon Creek. It used to run around over by McDonald's and then loop back over to the regular spot. And I imagine that when it was over there, it was quite shallow and rocky, so maybe they got the church over the creek that way. I don't know. It's not been written down, but you have to speculate a little bit. Then they moved it up the hill and parked it right in the middle of Main Street, right about where the post office, maybe the old post office stands. Okay, 1877 comes along, and there's a fire in a blacksmith shop, and it catches the church on fire, and the church burns down. No more First Baptist Church. Everybody's pretty upset. The bell falls off the steeple and crashes into Main Street, and it was really a dismal day in town. But, like always, people pulled together. They sent the pieces of the bell back to Troy, New York, where the people who had originally made it recast it for them at no charge, which was very nice. So they got the bell back. And then they began to build the next First Baptist Church. That building is still standing. It's up on West Avenue. It's that green apartment building on the south side of the road, right after the Methodist Church. That was the old First Baptist Church. In 1920, the Lake Avenue Baptist Church, or the Free Will, and the First decided, let's combine and not have these two different denominations. So they did. That building ended up being empty, and Bob Floyd's father bought it and made it into apartments. So I remember it called the Floyd Apartments, but it's still there. They got that open, and next comes the Methodist Church. About 1883, the Methodist Church that we know today on West Avenue was built by a preacher and an architect combined. His name was Reverend Cook. And he built the church, and the Baptists over on Lake Avenue, the Free Will Baptists, were watching all this. They said, gee, that is really a nice church. They wanted one like it. So they made arrangements with Mr. Cook, and he was more than happy to come over and do another church. And in the meantime, they had to make way for the building of the church because they wanted to put it on the same foundation as the old church, or the old church. So they moved the old church over to the vacant spot on Main Street where the First Baptist Church used to be, just sitting there empty, and plopped their Free Will Baptist Church on that spot. And they went over their church while the new church is being built. It took about a year. And the new church is the one that's still there with the steeple. And that was built in 1884. And if you don't believe me, go check the cornerstone out, because that's how I found out. That it was, it's right there. And so the old church is no longer busy, so they put a for sale sign up, and Evan and Alan get there real quick and buy it. And they get all the land that goes with it on both sides. So the next picture, I hope, is going to be the picture of that. Yes. So that's what they end up with. There's the old Free Will Baptist Church, built about 1835, that used to stand on Lake Avenue. Got moved over to Main Street, and then they added this more modern general store on. And you'll see another picture in a minute of that. It goes way, way back from the back. So ZWJ Newcomb rents the old church part of the building. Can you folks hear me in the back okay? I'll try to get it up there. And so the people here, Alan is standing there to the, I guess that's the right, oh, that's the left, facing it, and ZWJ Newcomb, I think, is down on the corner, but you can see the signs over there. ZJW, that stands for Zela William James. He had three names, Newcomb Hardware. And then up on top, looking out the window, is William Iveson. He's the father of Ed Iveson, who had Iveson's store, which was where the M&T Bank stood. And so this is the second chapter of their business. And we're at about 1885 here, maybe something like that. And as I say, they had some good luck and some bad luck. This just talks about what I just said. ZWJ Newcomb rented the west side. Henry Cosman, I didn't mention, had a jewelry store on the west end. And then Will Iveson's harness shop was on the second floor. Henry Cosman was known to say that while I was in business in Hilton for 60 years, I was burned out 3 times. But he managed to save all his jewelry and silver. And so he didn't lose his inventory, but he had to find a new place every now and then to set up shop. Okay, a few years later, they decided to cover the old church with a false front and make it look like one operation. And the interesting thing here is the only thing that is visible today that is still here is the steeple of the Baptist church. That's the one that was built in 1884, so it's brand new. The house over on your right is an old house that stood on Hovey Street. It was Alan Fraser's first home. It was pretty handy, just running out the back door and into your store. And then this little lawn over here was what's left of the village green. We had a village green here back in the day where they'd have strawberry socials and wrestling matches and different things going on. And notice the street, it's just like a country lane or something. There's some sort of a wood sidewalk there. You've got a porch where the church used to be, and it's the same porch that was in front of the church, and I'm sure that was added. The little building at the end is Henry Cosman's jewelry store, the second one, I guess.
There's some road apples on the street too.
What's road apples?
Yeah.
You got a good eye.
It's always hungry.
The railroad brought prosperity to North Parma and business was good. Alan and Evan had lots of good luck with the business. But in 1886, Alan lost his oldest son, who was only 8 years old, to appendicitis. And that really was a bad thing for both he and his wife. In 1893, his wife died. They say she never got over the loss of the son. And then in 1894, he married Elfrida Tambling. Elfrida was a graduate of Crane Institute in Potsdam, New York. She was a concert pianist. She played the organ at the First Baptist Church, and she was attractive. And he needed a wife, and that's all I know. And somehow it happened. Okay, this is an advertisement. This is a little tiny trade card, but it's blown up here to look big, for the toilet and bath, Ladies Brothers Company's white silk so unsurpassed for fine laundry. And then on the back, A.B. Fraser, dealer in general merchandise, North Parma. It's got a date of 1888 on it, which is kind of neat. And then there's some script there. If you cut 30 wrappers off, you can send them into the company and you can get something really nice. Like some kind of a picture. Okay, Evan's job, he was the front of the house. Alan handled finance and purchasing and more heady business matters. Evan handled sales and marketing and promotion and that sort of thing. He was always in the front of the store, schmoozing with customers and things like that. You'll see that's Fraser's cornet band. Why did they have that? Well, it was good advertising. You supported this band in town and you marched in parades all over Western New York when you could. And you got your name out in front of the public. I don't know the names of these other folks except the guy with the beard. That's Jonathan Greenwell. He's a relative of the Greenwells here in town. And he was also the constable and also the choir master of the Baptist Church. That's about all I know. He lived down on the corner of Hazen Street. And I think he had his blacksmith shop out in the back. There was an old barn there years ago with a cupola on it, which was reputed to be his blacksmith shop. Evan is standing center there in front of the young fellow where they have the drum. Okay, to get your merchandise out into the country, you had to have a peddler. And the farmers were tied up. Any of you who have been in the farm business know you don't just, you need something, you run into town. You wait, or wait till a peddler comes. And this was the way of doing business back then. The location, I think, is on Curtis Road. Curtis Road at one time was lined with stone walls on both sides. In 1934, Myron Roberts had new roads coming through town. They had some kind of a big contraption that came in and gobbled up the stones and chewed them up, and they made the roadbed out of the stone walls. Henry Buffton is the peddler. Henry Buffton is another Canadian. Anybody that remembers David Day?
Oh, yes.
David Day is the gentleman that wrote the book My First Life, talking about growing up in Hilton in the 30s and 40s. Well, Henry was his great-grandfather, and he was a Canadian, so he and Evan and Alan probably got along fine. And he also had been in the Civil War, which is interesting, a Canadian fighting in the Civil War. He was at Gettysburg, a lot of the battles, and we were researching a little bit of what his background there was. But he also, this is kind of neat, Henry Buffton sold insurance, but he was also the peddler at Fraser's. So he's probably had a double objective there. He could sell insurance to the farmers for their barns and sell the women some pins and needles and brooms and things. You can see some brooms on there, some wash tubs. Who knows what's inside? The horses are King and Rex. They were Evans. And they're a nice couple of nice white horses, and I suppose that having two white horses would make people look twice when you're coming down the country road. And there he is coming home. We're really lucky to have both these pictures. This one came from David Day's sister, Ann Day, who maybe some of you remember, Ann Rocco. And she brought it into the historian's office, and we were able to copy it. And it's the first time we've ever had it out, so it's a perfect time to display it. And they're coming back, and there are the stone walls, and you can see the brooms a lot better, and so forth. But Henry, he was an insurance salesman, and he was quite a prominent fellow in town. In fact, I believe he was a village president at one time. This Elam Cross, who I spoke of earlier, was the very first village president when Hilton was incorporated. A village president was a mayor. Later, about 1910 or 15, they changed the title to mayor instead of village president. Okay, this is a picture I referred to a little earlier. It's kind of a cross or angular picture of Main Street. You're looking west. There's this store, it's still got the church. So it's a picture taken probably around 1883 or 4, maybe 5 even, before they put the false front on. And down a little further, you can see a little small house there. That house was a very early house on Main Street. It probably was the tenant house for Ira Foote's house, and that was the old commercial hotel, which stood where the M&T Bank stands today. And later, it was a rental property, and Don Newcomb, Z.W.J. Newcomb, rented that house. And Bill Newcomb, the mayor, was born there. Don Newcomb, you'll see a picture of Don Newcomb come up in a minute. And it stood where the State Bank of Hilton would soon be built, in that particular location. It's just a little bit east of Huey's, as we know it today. So I still want to know what that other building is there standing on the village green. Could be a barber shop, have no idea. But exploring this picture has given us a lot of ideas. And you can also see how far back the store goes north. This is a picture that is a blow-up of a picture that they would print in the Hilton Record prior to 1903, or maybe after 1903 when they're discussing history. And I just happened to have the little copper block, printing block that they used to make that. And for many of you remember print blocks, but the younger people here probably didn't know that printing was done like that. Now it's done digitally and much easier. But you had to have a print block if you wanted to get a picture in. You had to set type all day long to come out with a paper. But this is the original print block for that photograph there. Okay, some bad luck. On September 7th, Labor Day, 1903, tragedy struck. The store had just opened that morning, and a customer had requested a gallon of varnish. The clerk, Germ Elliott, from Hamlin, he went to the basement of the hardware store with a kerosene lantern. He pried open the barrel, holding the varnish. It hadn't been open in 4 years. A lot of fumes came out and ignited the lantern, and the whole basement was aflame. He got out with his life. He burned his left arm badly, but otherwise was fine. Unfortunately, the flame just took off. The old church was dry. That was the church part of the building. There were probably more paints and varnishes down there, who knows what, but the fire just went really fast. And fortunately, it was during the day. Nobody's life was lost, which is good news on that. And there were plenty of people around Main Street, so they all ran and got their buckets and ran in the store and began to pull merchandise out. And I think they put it on Main Street and also in the back of the store. So most of the inventory of the Fraser store was saved, and I'm sure the hardware store as well. Now we've got some really early pictures here that have never been out too much before of this particular fire. And so there we are, right on Main Street. So on Labor Day 1903, it's 123 years ago. And there you see Orange Green's drugstore. This is the second one he owned. This one burned in 1910. And then the yellow brick one that you all know is there today. But you'll see Hilton Record. Hilton Record is in the middle window. Joseph Ingham's hardware store is over on the left side. And I'm not sure what this one is. It's, can't quite make it out, I'm sorry. But anyway, that was Orange Green's. And then there was a little bake shop here. And then that house that we've been talking about apparently perished in this fire. And now you see the store going. And there are the people running around, women in their long skirt. Must have been really hot. And now they're getting the hose in. They telephoned Charlotte from the only phone in town at the time. They send their pumper over because the one we had wasn't big enough. Well, by the time the pumper got over on the railroad, the building was gone. But I'm sure people were grabbing their buckets of water, but all to no avail. Now everybody's on Main Street, in the center of Main Street, and you've got this wonderful old Hilton Hotel in the background. This is everybody's favorite old Hilton picture. One time I sent a picture of this to Conrad Hilton, who was the owner and president of Hilton Hotels. I was a hotel management major as a kid. And he wrote me a nice letter back, said, I had no idea that there was another Hilton Hotel before mine. Thank you very much. And then the bad news, he and Eva Gabor, I guess, were married at the time. They sent all their Christmas cards to the Hilton post office in Hilton, New York, for Blanche Randall and Bill Farr to post on hand. They were not happy.
That's on the south side, though, isn't it?
You're looking south when you're looking at the hotel.
So
That's
it's the
right
opposite
there.
side of the fire.
What's that?
It's the opposite side of the fire?
Yeah, it's the opposite side. Now what the folks standing there didn't know is 2 months later, the third floor of that was going to burn off. That was the Merritt fire. There were so many fires in 1903. It's no wonder anybody stayed here. And you can see the wet blankets hanging on the building over there to prevent sparks from igniting the dried shingles. The Tennyson block was the lower 2 stories of that building with no porch. The Pigots bought it somewhere, I guess, 1885, and they added the porch and added the 3rd story with a widow's walk. And the 3rd story was used for the Masonic Hall.
Dave,
Yeah.
it's also the site of the first meeting of St. Leo's Church congregation.
Thank you, you're right.
8 years, Dave.
That's right. Was that in the Masonic section up there?
Correct.
This gentleman under the wet blanket is Gilbert Childs. He owned a carriage painting business, and he was helping to fight the fire. You can see a pile of some kind of inventory there. I have no idea, probably shirts and dresses and things in boxes, maybe shoes. This is the picture I want you to see first. In this picture, I think this is the house on Hovey Street that didn't burn down, but the whole south side of the house was totally scorched. They later pulled those clapboards off and put fresh on, and you wouldn't know the difference. It did finally succumb to fire in the 1965 fire. But over here in the middle, you're looking at the vault of the old, the Frasers had a private bank in their store. And there's the vault, and this vault, I think, after the 65 fire, was buried out in the parking lot. And of course, they got in it, and if there was anything to save, they did. But this is the newspaper account of the story. That's kind of how I got my information in the 1903 Rochester paper. Told the whole story of how it happened, and Germ Elliott and his barrel of varnish. So after the fire, when you're in business, in retail, you can't sit there and grieve. You got to get moving. And so they set up a tent out in the back parking lot and had a fire sale. All that stuff on Main Street that was halfway decent, they brought in and probably had it for 75% off. So that's the one picture of the tent that existed in 1903. And so they got rid of whatever merchandise they had, and then they kept it going all during the construction of the new store. So that was all winter long. You couldn't leave your customers without things, so the tent worked out on a temporary basis. The architect and designer of the new store was a man named George Garrison Priestley, and he lived over on the Lawrence Road at the corner of Route 19, and that big brick house still there. Strusenbergs lived there, in the 50s and 60s, but that was his house. He also designed the Heinz plant here in Hilton. This is, to me, one of my favorite pictures because this, is 1904. The fire took place Labor Day, 1903, and they were constructing all through the winter. And the new store opened in March of 1904. So they really moved fast to get this new store up. And they might have been a little bit glad because now they could make a bigger store and not have all that old church and the green and all that in their way. So this shows you the construction of the New Fraser block. You can also notice on the other side that indeed I was right. Yep, the top floor burned off of the old Hilton Hotel. That was about 2 months later. The Methodist Church's steeple is looking very nice there. That was taken down in 1954, I think. Hurricane Hazel came through town, blew the roof off the school, and everybody was watching the Methodist Church steeple teeter back and forth, and they said it's time to take this down. It wasn't safe. It didn't blow over, but it got shortened. And the street is a mess. You got some young boys out there, and it's muddy, pretty yucky. And then you'll see a stump right there on the right, and that was a stump that was there to protect traffic when they turned down Hovey Street, so they didn't cut too close inside. It was an old locust tree. Okay, this is the finished product of the new store. This is March 1904. This little building on the end is the corner post office. And when you're building a store like this, you want to have as much in the store that you can rent to other people as possible, because that helps pay off the mortgage. So that was the Hilton post office. Later, you'll see pictures where they filled in this corner here with a brick wall. It was the only brick part of this building here, and that'll come up shortly. You've got Henry Cosman's jewelry store in here. You've got the Newcomb, I think Newcomb and another partner by that time was in the hardware store. And then the furniture galleries were upstairs here. There were not apartments at that time. This thing is touchy. Okay, this is the store from another angle. You're looking east and looking down. And this vacant block here is where that house used to stand. And they hadn't put anything in there. Later, it was a funny thing between Evan and Alan. Alan was a futurist, and Evan was he loved horses. He thought the automobile was a flash in the pan. He didn't think it was going to amount to anything. He loved his horses, and so he wanted to sell carriages in the store. Well, Alan, they got along pretty well for two brothers. He said, okay, we'll try it out for a year and see what happens. Well, you know what happened. They sold one carriage and that was the end of it. And so in that carriage section of the store, that's where they established the official State Bank of Hilton in 1914 when they finally got their charter. So all along here, interesting things to look at. When you get these pictures blown up, you can see things. And this is a picture that somehow got in here. It's 1901. It's when everything was happy on Main Street before all these fires. But that's the Republican nominations for Teddy Roosevelt and William McKinley. They put this banner all the way across Main Street, tied it from one building to the other. So when people came, I think they're getting ready for the Memorial Day parade. These are some inside shots of the store. It's pretty gloomy looking, but it's what they had back in those days. And this is the dry goods section. I think the lady there is Louise Jenigan. Evan is over on the right, or the left rather. And then something bad happens again. Burglars. Burglars came and blew the safe in the bank. And all the bank was back then was a little private office in the back of the store with a closed door. And this is the whole article about it, telling how thieves broke in the night. There was a couple living up overhead by the name of Bert and Mert Smith. Anybody remember them? Bert Smith, he was Boyd Smith's father, and Henry Smith, the barber's brother. He lived down in later life, Bert lived down where Dave Rowley lives today. That was his home at that time. He lived to be quite old, but he was up there, he and his wife, they heard the burglars downstairs, and they, apparently when they blew the safe, it shook the whole building. So they jumped out of bed and began to run around, and I guess the burglars got scared and left. Now, here's the interesting thing. The thieves only got $2. And a lot of paper that they didn't know what to do with, and ended up down on about where Tom Berger's place is. It was a vacant, kind of a creek flats, all strewn around the next day, and they were able to collect it. So they didn't really lose much, but the reason for that was Alan was so conservative that he never left the money in the safe at night. He'd just taken in $75,000 from all the farmers whose Apple money had come in, and they would bring it up to the bank, and he'd hold it there or take it to Rochester, and then they'd come and get it in the spring when they needed it to get their crops in. That's kind of how it worked. It was all on good faith and so forth, but Alan was smart enough to take that home with him and he took it in a pillowcase and put it under his bed. Now, nobody's heard about this because it was a total secret in the family. Nobody was supposed to breathe a word of this. And he even had a burglar alarm on the house. And he slept with a revolver in his nightstand drawer. And I just happen to have the revolver here. I've taken the barrel out, so don't get excited. But there it is. And Dave Allmeter restored this for me. I actually do have a barrel now for it, but I didn't think it'd be wise to put it in. But it's, what is it, Dave, a bulldog?
Yeah, it's a bulldog. It's a 38 Smith & Wesson bulldog.
38 Smith & Wesson bulldog. How much did it cost in the day?
$2.50.
$2.50. I wonder if it worked. Here's the barrel.
That's the cylinder.
So anyway, pictures now of the safe. There's the safe. They blew the door. Again, thanks to Frank Hubble, he's got cleaned up very nicely. And this is a great picture of the office all messed up. These pictures were taken for insurance purposes. Somehow they survived. The paper's all over the floor. Later, Frank and I are going to work on trying to figure out what these pictures say up here, and if we can find out any information. That's the office. Yeah, what a way to come into work the next morning. So that was a piece of bad luck, but it had positive sides to it. This desk here, after the store closed in 41, migrated over across the street to Henry Smith's barber shop, and later became Al McMahon's barber shop, and then Ron Gosnell. And when Al closed shop, his daughter Donna kept the desk, and it's now residing out in Dayton, Ohio, where they live, and they're taking great care of it. And maybe someday it'll come back to Hilton, who knows? Okay, back inside the store, getting ready for Christmas. You can see the bells and the stuff up there, all these cases and things full of stuff. This is the crockery department, china, or, what do you call these things, jardiniers and glassware and oil lamps down on the far corner there. This is the east side of the store upstairs. That was the part that was added with a brick wall. This is Evan driving to work in his Cutter one morning. And again, he liked his horses, and there was a barn out back, he could keep them. And he's wearing a sealskin hat that I was hoping to locate, but wasn't able to. It's around somewhere. And we were able to identify this because Ken Freeman got an album from a party down in Pennsylvania that we figured out belonged to Loretta Williams. And that picture was in that album, and under it she'd written Evan Fraser and his fast horses. And so those horses must have come along at a good clip, and now they're the two dark ones. This is more going on in the store. Evan's standing up here. There was a crazy mirror up on the landing here that kids used to like to stand in front of and see how fat they could be or how skinny. And that was another one of Evan's ploys to get people in. The kids would like to come in while the folks were shopping. This lady over here in the, let me see, what is that, the left, with her back to us is Fern Stevens. And she was the administrative assistant in the store. She was a granddaughter of Gideon and Ruth Archer, very smart lady. And she was still living up until 1975, I think. And I spent time visiting with her, and she told me a thing or two about the store. One of the things is this little gizmo here. I don't know if you can see it. It just looks like a little round wooden cup. But they had some kind of a crazy mechanical contraption that would, when you bought something at the counter and you paid for it, the clerk would put this in this thing and pull a lever, and it would go flying up over the ceiling and across down to the central cashier. And there's a name for that. I never saw one work, but it had it explained to me. And it was not electronic, it was just all spring mechanism. But the thing would fly, and everybody was fascinated because you'd think there was a bird going across the ceiling or something when that went through. There's the carriage shop, and Evan watching over things, probably feeling rather dismal that there weren't many sales. And now they have to, because of this robbery a few years ago, they had to get a charter from the state of New York. This couldn't be a private bank. When you had a private bank, I guess you had a license and you could do business. But now things had gotten to the point that they had to have a charter. So they applied and they got one. And they call it the A.B.E. Fraser Bankers, but it later got the name State Bank of Hilton. And there's a picture now of Alan and Don Newcomb sitting there looking pleased with themselves. And I think that's the charter up on the wall. And that's in the building that was the carriage shop. Because when that year passed, Alan said enough, and they quickly turned it into the bank. And
Which one's Alan?
pardon?
Which one's Alan there?
He's the older guy with the white hair.
Is that your grandfather?
Yeah. And Don Newcomb is his son-in-law. And Don was born in that house, that little house that we talked about earlier. And later, bank was built on the site of that house. Later, Don became the president of the State Bank of Hilton for 4 or 5 years, so they used to tell that story. And there they are standing up, and this is the counter section of the bank behind the counter. And this, see that tall desk there? I think that's the same one that's over there. Pete McCann donated that one. And it came out of Bill Newcomb's office, but I think when the store closed, Bill got that from the store. You know, people were buying things, they're trying to divest of things. So I think that maybe that same desk, it's certainly the same vintage. Here's Fern Stevens. She was the administrative assistant, and she later married Ira Cross from down at Bartlett's Corners. Very smart lady, and everybody knew her, and she really got things done. Every organization needs somebody like Fern. There she is, hard at work in the bank on the customer side of the bank. And so this is that carriage shop, and it's cut, sliced in two. You can see the pillars, and later they opened up another section of a store and double the size of the bank. Unfortunately, I didn't have pictures of that to put in, but that's how that began. Okay, we're back on the outside. It's winter. You see some sledges down there with a horse. Didn't seem like a busy day in Hilton. Again, everybody's busy working on their farms. This telephone pole here is an anomaly. Looks like it's going to fall over, and it seems to pop up in all these pictures. Now, back in around that time, 1911, there were only, 2 or 3 phones in town. Later, the Hilton Telephone Company, I think it was earlier than 1911. This is the Hilton Telephone Directory of 1911. And after the program, if you want to come up and see if you can find your grandparents in there, you're welcome to look. But there was an earlier time when they didn't have, they only had 2 telephones in town. There was one in the store and one out west somewhere. And when the gypsies would come to town, the people out west would call the store and they'd tell everybody on Main Street, and they'd pull their shades and lock the doors. The gypsies weren't too happy, but Louis saved the day, because Louis would open up and give them all free ice cream cones. And they'd march down South Avenue happy as they could be, and the merchants would all chip in and pay Louis for the ice cream. It's kind of a polite way to move them along, because they steal children and also things in your store, so they said.
Come in handy.
Okay, it's Christmas again. I think this is a little redundant. Whoop. Here's the board of directors of the State Bank of Hilton, all lined up by height. We've got Evan, the tallest, then Harry Greensmith. He was the Baptist minister. Harry Greensmith came from England, and he brought Boy Scouts into Hilton. And Frank Hubble, who's a Boy Scout aficionado, told me that Hilton had Troop 99. Anybody remember that? He said that was the first troop in the country. And I'd never heard that before. He said they wanted to be, is that correct, Kyle?
Yeah, we talked, the Boy Scouts, everybody had a 100th anniversary about the same time, and was talking to the Scoutmaster. Through some sort of clerical error, their paperwork got lost and got pushed back, so that's why they ended up as 99. But they are one of the first troops in the country.
That's another badge of honor for Hilton. And the next guy is Allen, and then Van Allen Hovey from Hovey Street, and a wealthy farmer from Bennett Road named Albert Smith. And he lived in the big house across from where Danny and Faye Smith family used to live. Back at the store, looks like a couple of guys in drag there in the back, but I'm not sure what's going on. And Lottie Nyman's over there watching. And there's Evan and Alan, his older gentleman. Evan's hair apparently turned white after he had typhoid fever. And they both, if you notice in the early pictures, they both had dark hair. And they've now become fairly prosperous and looking. And there's the dry good department. This is John Way John Way was a clerk. He's the guy on the left. And Gene and George Colomer, they're in the store that morning. And George is the tall one on the side, Gene's over to the right. World War I is over. Hilton is celebrating. They've got the Dreadnought is afloat. You can see the cars lined up on Main Street. They're all over the place. It's like a car show. Yeah. And people are parked kind of slant-wise. And I guess there were a lot of parades. I heard that they had a hanging effigy of the Kaiser. We don't have a picture of that, but I've heard that told. Here you can see the brick side of that building, no longer than just a little tacked on post office. Okay, now we're in the 40s, and this is more my time, and that's kind of how we remember Main Street. Fraser Store went out of business in 1941. Why?
Walmart?
Walmart? Well, we didn't have Walmart, but we had people with automobiles, too many automobiles. People were driving to the Ridge because they could get it cheaper.
Yeah.
They were going into Rochester, to Sibley's. Here you have this great big old country general store, department store, and it was archaic. It was a paradigm shift. And then the Depression had something to do with it, I'm sure. The Depression, none of us probably remember it, but it was a pretty gruesome time. You can see the cars there. Going up the street, the State Bank of Hilton now has a fancy, they call it a colonial front, but I'm not sure that's correct. It's just a false front. The firemen thought that it was a totally brick building and that the fire would stop there, but no, it was a false front, and the wooden section went right through the bank there. You had to burn that right down. So we're down to Jose Joe's. That's where that little house was. And then they added the carriage shop and all these other stores. Now that was Michaels, Francis Michaels. He was prior to Homer Marple furniture store, and then let me see here. That was Borelli's, then the post office, RG&E, the pleasure shop, and the barber shop. And the barber at that time, well, see, Bert Daly was the barber. For years, he was the longest person in business in Hilton. He'd been the barber for 60 years, not necessarily in that spot. And one day he closed the door, locked the store, stepped off, and dropped dead. And he was about 82 years old, and Jimmy Daly, who maybe some of you remember, was his grandson. And Bert was a fixture in town.
It wound up being Vernon, wasn't it?
And then Vernon came.
Vernon.
Yeah, Vernon was an interesting
Yeah,
character.
he was,
Yeah.
liked his,
Yeah, and then it was Robillard's Jewelers. And during the fire, Mr. Robillard, they say, was never the same after that. All his jewelry was flying out the window with the heat, and there were diamonds and rubies all over the Main Street. People's watches, things that, not a good scene. There's the brick wall again. This is an earlier picture, and you can see the bank down there without the colonial front. Pretty ugly. It was time they put that new front on. It didn't last long. They got about 10 years out of it. Those are the keys to the first store, the one that burned in 1903. Those are down in the historian's office in the case. Those survived somehow. And these are barrel banks. This belonged to Ethel Panaritas. The bank used to try to get children to learn how to save their money. And the parents would get these little barrel banks, and they had a lock, and only the bank had the key to it. And so the kids put their nickels and dimes in. when they filled it up, they could take it back to the bank and maybe buy a bond or put it in their little account or something. But they got the idea, it's not a bad idea to save your money for a rainy day. I don't know if they do that with kids today or not, but Ethel gave me that. And she said, in later years, she found the key, or she got a key from somebody at the bank, and then she lost it again. And then after she died, her niece Linda Sweeting found the key. So we've got the key in the case in the office, and her quarters are still in there. And I imagine they're pure silver and not the phony kind. So, and then Jerry Pickett, a few years ago, was on eBay or online, and he found this savings bank from the Hilton Bank. I'd never seen that one before. And it's another model for teaching kids how to save money. This is a shoehorn. These were given away as, you know, little things for people, shoehorn with the name of the store on it. And they had button hooks for buttoning, you know, women had those high button shoes. They had to sit down and take 10 minutes to get a button. This is a thing to hold your pants, a pant hanger. And there's some other odds and ends up here, but one of the most interesting things is this, there were no credit cards back in those days. And a lot of times people didn't have cash to pay, so they could put it online if their reputation was good and they paid their bills. This is a whole month for, I think, Charlie Stroud. And there's one over here, and I was hoping Ed Gable will be here tonight because this is one that his father and mother had back in 1938. And they spent $68 one month.